Okay, I think we should start. Um, yes. Am I audible? I hope I am. Yes, I think we should start. It's already 5 minutes late and we can just continue.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. So, namaste and good evening, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us today. I am Vandana Chauhan, and it is my absolute pleasure to host this special learning session titled From Social Media to Science Using Web Sourced Media to Study Raptors. For those who are joining us today, Raptor Network India is a growing and vibrant community dedicated to monitoring and protecting the raptors. It brings together people from different walks of life, be it scientists, field biologists, forest department staff, citizen scientists, research scholars, and youth who are passionate about birds of prey. The vision is simple yet very powerful to create spaces to learn from each other, share field experiences, build specific understanding, and strengthen conservation through collective effort. This platform aims to make raptor research more collaborative, more inclusive, and more accessible. And today's session is a wonderful example of that spirit of shared learning. So today's session is designed to be interactive and participatory. So please feel free to add your comments or questions in chat box. Uh, uh, Corner Panter will be answering at the end of the session. So I would like to formally introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Corner Panter is a researcher and lecturer in zoology and conservation at Plumpton College in the UK, that is United Kingdom. His research focuses on raptor ecology and conservation behavior, specializing on human impacts on raptors, including work on behavior, causes of mortality, and predictive modeling. His research integrates traditional ecological methods with open source and innovative data streams, particularly the use of web sourced photographs and videos. In this talk, he will explore how web sourced media can be used to study aspects of raptor diets, highlighting both methodological opportunities and implications of raptor research and conservation. We are truly privileged, sir, to have you with us today. The stage is yours. You can just continue. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you for the really nice introduction. It's an
Yeah.
absolute pleasure to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 2
Yes.
moments. Okay. Can you see that all okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So thank you very much for the invitation to talk about some of my research with Raptor Network India. So the title of my talk today is From Social Media to Science, using web source media to study raptors. So I'll be giving an overview of the methods, why it's a really nice tool to have in your toolkit when studying raptor ecology. And I'll be presenting some of the research that myself and colleagues have done over the past, I guess, 5 years or so using this method. And we'll also talk about the limitations and ethical responsibilities of raptor biologists when using third-party data. Okay, let me start. So I just thought I'd start with a bit about my background and my research. So my name is Connor Panter. I studied an undergraduate degree in ecology at the University of Brighton in the UK. And that's when I really fell in love with the subject and with wildlife, and of course with ecology and conservation biology. So from there onwards, I decided to progress into more of a research focused career. So I decided to do a postgraduate degree, a Master of Research degree in ecology and conservation, also at the University of Brighton. But I also lived abroad in the Czech Republic for a year studying red kites. And I then moved institutions and completed a PhD in biogeography, where I studied macroecological patterns in species abundance distributions. I've had my first paper published from the PhD late last year, and I've got a couple more PhD papers to come out at some point when I get a minute. But overall, broadly, my research interests, they span multiple disciplines and subfields, including, I'll just move this out of the way if I can, human impacts on biodiversity, of course. I'm more increasingly interested in elements of wildlife mortality and wildlife rehabilitation. So quite a lot of my research looks at analysing patterns in wildlife rehabilitation admissions data. I have quite a strong background in movement ecology research, especially the use of GPS, GSM telemetry devices, and analysing spatial. So they weren't designed for the use that we make of them. Despite this, web source media are increasingly being used within raptor research, and it's become a promising new method in the last few years. Okay, so moving on to the role that web source media play within raptor research. So why raptors as a group are ideal candidates for this type of research? Well, of course, most raptors are highly visible. I say most with a caveat there. They tend to be heavily photographed by bird watchers and subsequently uploaded onto the internet. They hold key positions within ecological trophic networks. So understanding their ecology helps us better understand ecosystem functioning and other dynamics within the natural environment. Importantly, they are under monitored in the global south. So there's an opportunity there for web source media to try and leverage some of this effort in the global south to improve raptor research globally instead of it just being restricted to mainly North America and Europe, I guess, and some parts of Africa. Web platforms, they contain millions and millions and millions of undocumented raptor observations, which are not used in scientific research. And regions with limited long-term telemetry or these huge long-term monitoring projects, web source media provides a really important opportunity to complement existing projects or lack of projects, and they should not be seen as an inferior method to study wildlife at all. Okay, strengths of web source media within raptor research. So the one thing that I really like about web source media is the unprecedented scales that data can be analysed across, and this probably harks back to my PhD in biogeography. By scale, I'm not just talking about spatial scale, I'm talking about temporal scale and also taxonomic scale. And given these unprecedented scales, it allows for novel questions to be asked, which were previously impossible when raptor biologists tend to use more traditional approaches such as pellet or prey remains analysis. Often, these web source media studies, they tend to be broader. They focus on large patterns rather than individual or local or regional level idiosyncrasies. So you have to bear that in mind. But these large data sets, they allow for more powerful statistics, which can strengthen hypothesis testing, if done correctly, of course. And that can be a really powerful tool. Secondly, web source media, they facilitate citizen science, whereby data are collected for other purposes. But if we're using it within published research, it increases public engagement with the science. And you have this feedback mechanism, this feedback loop, which then more people, if they know their work's going to contribute to something, they tend to engage more of it in the future. And it enables studies on more cryptic species or those that are really challenging to research in the field. So we're overcoming some limitations of more traditional field techniques, but certainly not replacing them by any means. So how can web source data be used? Okay, and this is a question that I get asked a bit. My response is always it entirely depends on your research question or questions. So what I've done here is I've come up with this. I put together this table with different potential projects that you may want to run within the framework of raptor diet research. And I've basically highlighted what your photo must include and given some example data sources. So, for example, if you're interested in just doing a simple dietary assessment and summarizing what a particular raptor is eating, maybe within a wintering period or summer period or whatever, Your your photo data set must include photographs of raptors on or killing or consuming identifiable prey. And the prey species, sorry, the prey doesn't have to be identifiable to the species level. It could be identified to the genus level or to the family level. It really depends on the scope of your research and your research questions. And so for simple dietary assessments using web source media, there are lots of different data sources which you can use for this kind of thing. They include iNaturalist, Macaulay Library, most social media sites, and Google Images, plus more. If you want to look at demographic patterns in raptor diet, so these are all diet related examples, then you need a data set of web source photographs or videos that is slightly more refined. Okay, so of course you need photographs of raptors on the prey, but then you have to be able to classify your um, photographs of the raptors into distinct demographic categories depending on your research questions. So if you're interested in age differences, you need to be able to age your raptor species to from just a single photograph. Okay, so that may be adult birds, non-adult birds, or unknowns. It's really important that if you're not sure, then just classify it as unknown. And really stick to the broad level classifications when using this kind of data set. And similarly, you can do the same thing for sex, male, female, or unknown. Okay, and again, you can use quite a broad range of example data sources such as iNaturalist and Macaulay Library to do this, but really the species of interest will depict whether you can actually analyze and ask demographic questions in relation to the species diet. If you're interested in spatial patterns in diet, of course you'll need photographs of your raptor species on prey, but you also need metadata associated with each observation. And for spatial patterns in diet, you'll be requiring lat-long coordinates for sure, or descriptions of where or accurate descriptions of where the photograph or video was taken. Now, this limits what kind of data sources you can use. And so, if you're looking at asking spatial questions, you'll be looking at obtaining data from iNaturalist, Macaulay Library, and WikiAvies. Social media and Google Images are very unlikely to give you accurate coordinate locations for each observation. It depends. And the same kind of thing for temporal patterns in diet. You need this metadata and you need observation dates rather than upload dates. And this is something you need to be aware of because sometimes photographers will use the upload date as the observation date, and it just wouldn't make sense. And again, iNaturalist will provide this metadata. Macaulay Library will do as well, and I believe WikiAvies as well, although I haven't used that one directly. Okay, so moving on. So the evidence base. What does the literature actually show? So the next few slides, I'm going to present some new results of a quantitative systematic review that Arjun and I have recently performed. This is the title of our review article, Eye on Ornithology, a review of the use of web source photographs and videos in ornithology research, and it's currently under review at IBIS. So I would appreciate it if these next few slides, if you could not circulate them on social media just yet, because we haven't, the paper's not published yet, so it could all change. Okay, so an overview of the review. So on the right here, you can see a schematic representation of, let me just move this out of the way slightly, a schematic representation of our literature search process and our screening stages and extraction stages. And you can see that we queried and searched for web source media studies for the whole of ornithology, not just raptor research, from three main sources. So we looked on the Web of Science, Google Scholar, and we did a snowball search, which is basically where we look at the citing studies that cited two important papers in the field. And in total, we had 513 studies that we considered for inclusion in our review, and then we performed title screening for relevance, abstract screening for refined relevance, full text screening, and onwards to data extraction. So after our process, we ended up with 64 studies with which we extracted quantitative data from. Okay. And these studies were published over a 10-year period between 2015 and 2020, and up to the end of 2024 inclusive. So this just goes to show how young the subfield of or the use of web source media within ornithology actually is. It's only really about 10 to 15 years old max. So we extracted the following. This is what we were interested in. So we were interested in the topics studied by the studies using web source media, okay? And we classified these into broad categories. We were interested in the species that were studied, the data type that the authors used. So did they use web source photos or web source videos? We were obviously, of course, interested in what sources of data they were using, and we were looking at whether there are any relationships between the topics studied and data sources and spatial scales, okay? And key biases that we found, so these are the things that stood out to us the most from our analysis, is that the species coverage was uneven and was dominated, this is for the whole of ornithology, by the way, dominated by passerines, okay? We found a spatial scale effect where we had more avian behavior studies tended to be conducted at smaller spatial scales. And the literature mostly used a handful of key data sources. So really, we're talking about 5 different sources of data that are regularly, frequently used within the relevant literature. Okay, web source photos are more often used to study birds when compared to videos. Okay, so here on the y-axis we have the proportion of studies, and on the x-axis the different topics that we identified when we did our systematic review. And you can see that for dietary studies, studies that looked at bird habitat use and molt and plumage, they 100% used photographs, so no videos used. Bird behavior studies tended to have a 45-55 mix. And there was a single study that studied lateralization, and that one study just used YouTube videos. So you can see that web source photographs are more often used to study birds than web source videos, but it really depends on the topic of the study. Most taxonomic groups are underrepresented, okay? But despite this, across the 64 studies that we extracted data from, web source media we used to study 33 different taxonomic orders. So basically what this plot here shows you are the 33 taxonomic orders on the y-axis, and on the x-axis we have the percentage of species that were studied within the studies relative to the total number of bird species described for each taxonomic order according to the IOC checklist. And the numbers at the top of the bars here show the number of species that were studied using web source media. And the dark purple bars show the taxonomic orders with which there was more greater than or equal the 50% taxonomic coverage relative to the total number of species described for that order. So you can see Stachoniforms and Gaviforms were well covered by the literature, whereas most other taxonomic orders were underrepresented, and there were many more avian orders that haven't even been studied using this approach. Okay, so most taxonomic groups are underrepresented in the web source media literature, and approximately 25% of described accipitary forms have been studied using this approach, but this value is even lower for owls or strigiforms, where we're looking at about 5 to 10% coverage on the total number of described owl species globally. So there's more work to be done. Okay, so by topic, molt, plumage patterns and abnormalities. These types of studies dominate the literature at the moment, with just under a third of all of our studies in our review studying bird molt and plumage patterns. Of course, they use photos. Second were bird distributions, followed by bird behavior and diets, okay? And you can see here from this heat map that there's uneven sampling by taxonomic groups across the different study topics. Okay, you can see passerines dominated the entire data set, but were less commonly studied when in relation to birds, threats to birds, but quite often studied when the authors were looking at molt and plumage patterns, for example. Okay, you can see here with this this diagram that I produced that there's a complex relationship between the data source used and how that relates to the topic that's studied. So on the y-axis here, you have the number of unique study topic source combinations, and then on the other side, you have the different topics. And the top 10% of web source media data sources within ornithology are included on this plot. Okay, so Facebook, Google Images, iNaturalist, Macaulay Library, and WikiAvies. And I want to draw your attention to the diet section here because this is where most raptor research is featured. So raptors dominate the dietary studies within our review, okay? And you can see that in terms of data sources, an even distribution of different sources that are used to study bird diets. Okay, so I just want to draw your attention to this paper that was published in 2016 by Gabby Layton and colleagues. And you may have obviously be aware that I'll be using the term Google Images. So how is that actually done? So these colleagues here published and created and published a Google Images API, which is called Morphic, and it's a web tool that you can use to download. You can search Google Image, the Google Images database, and you can basically extract data from the different photographs manually, depending on your research question. So if you're interested in using Google Images for your own research, then I would definitely recommend reading this Methods in Ecology and Evolution paper by Layton et al. Okay, so moving on to case studies from the raptor research. Okay, so I'm starting with this paper that was published by Vince Naldo and colleagues in 2019, published in the Condor, now Ornithological Applications. And what they did is they studied the diet of martial eagle using web source photographs. And they used the Google Images API as well to collate their data. So their aim was to study martial eagle diet across large spatial scales, okay, across sub-Saharan Africa. Now, why is this important? So traditional field data are sparse, especially for this region, and this scope would be very challenging. You would need millions and millions of pounds and all the time in the world to travel across sub-Saharan Africa and collect all of these feeding observations. You need to be very lucky as well. However, web source photographs, it enables this challenge to be overcome and also allows and facilitates age-specific dietary patterns to be studied. So what the authors didn't do in this study was look at sex-related patterns in diet, and they also were unable to look at prey provisioning to young. That is a caveat of their study. But what did they find? So what they did is they compared the proportion of key prey items spatially across South Africa, Southern Africa, and Eastern Africa, and they compared these statistically. Okay, so you can see there was a significant difference in the different proportions of prey between Southern Africa and Eastern Africa. So you can see in East Africa, martial eagles tend to eat more mammalian prey, but in Southern Africa, they tend to eat more reptilian prey. And they were able to look at the differences in diet between adult and non-adult birds as well. And this was something that previously couldn't have been done using traditional field techniques. Okay, at least not at that spatial scale. Okay, so a year later, we started working on our first Eurasian sparrowhawk diet paper using web source photographs, inspired by Vince's work. And our aim was to study both sex and age differences in the Eurasian sparrowhawk diet across the UK. Okay, so we went one step further. And Eurasian sparrowhawk is an excellent species to do this because most accipiter hawks, they display extreme reverse sexual size dimorphism, so it's quite easy to sex and age the birds from a single photograph. So sparrowhawk prey remains, so it's this more traditional field technique that's used to study sparrowhawk diet, cannot often be ascribed sex or age classes, and you rarely even see the bird. However, web source photos, they enable these sex and age differences to be studied, of course. So we found that from our analysis, web source photos introduced the prey size bias into our diet data set, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a few slides' time. But what did we find? So you can see here on the left, here's a map of our spatial distribution of our data set. And you can see that we've got quite good coverage across most of England and Wales, less so in Scotland. But you can see that we were able to map the distribution of photographic samples by age class and sex. And then on the right-hand side here, what you can see is proportion of diet on the y-axis and sex on the x-axis. And then this is basically a faceted plot looking at statistical comparisons in the proportion of diet for the key prey species in the species diet. Okay, and the different letters show a significant difference between the two data points. So we did this for the common wood pigeon, common starling, Eurasian collared dove, rock dove, Eurasian blackbird, house sparrow, small unidentified birds, and European goldfinch. And these were the key prey species in our diet, which represented more than 5% of the species diet. Okay. And what we were able to do as well was extract average prey weights associated with each prey species that was in our photographic data set. And this allowed us to compare differences in mean prey weight between the adult and juvenile sexes. So you can see here that female sparrowhawks are significantly more likely to prey on larger prey items relative to the male for both adults and juveniles. Okay, and we did this proportionally and continuously using different variables. So we looked at prey size class. So we categorized it into small, medium, large, and then also looked at the mean prey weights in grams as well. This pattern between the sexes is well known in the literature, but this was actually the first time someone was able to quantify it statistically, and that was all thanks to the use of web source media. Okay, so following on from the first Sparrowhawk paper, we published a second paper in 2022 in Royal Society Open Science. And for this study, we aimed to study sex differences in sparrowhawk diets, but this time over time, so throughout the entire year. And why did we do this? Well, field-based approaches, so for example, analysis of prey remains, they are restricted mostly to the breeding season. There are a few example studies out there where they've studied sparrowhawk diet throughout the year, but it's very laborious and time consuming to collect all of prey remains throughout the whole year. So this allowed us to ask different types of questions about sparrowhawk ecology beyond the breeding season. Okay. And we explored how the probabilities of key prey species in the diet varied over time. We did this by looking at differences over the different seasons and then by month by month. And as expected, we had limited sample sizes for adult females during the incubation period when they're incubating eggs. So this is what we found. So on the left-hand side here, you can see the number of photographs by different seasons, and then obviously by month. And then we did quite a similar thing to the first paper where we were able to look at changes in mean prey weight over time, so throughout the seasons, throughout the different months of the year. And we also did this for our categorical variable where we've got prey size class, small, medium, and large. And you can see that throughout the whole year, females tend to prey on larger prey items than the male, but there's a significant decrease in mean prey weight during the summer period when birds are breeding and they're probably preying on vulnerable fledgling passerines that have just recently left the nest, amongst other reasons. And so, as I mentioned, we were also able to model probabilities of each key prey species within the diet across seasons as well. And we found that blackbirds, the Eurasian blackbirds, were significantly more likely to become prey in spring for adult males relative to autumn. So the sparrowhawks tend to prey on blackbirds early on in the year when compared to later on in the year. And we found that for adult female sparrowhawks, rock doves were significantly more important prey items for them in winter than compared to summer. And this may be because they tend to go for larger prey items during harsher conditions as a trade-off for hunting effort and hunting success. Okay, case studies from Raptor research. Moving on from sparrowhawks to a more recent paper that we published on the crested caracara diet. And this time we took a larger approach, and our aim was to study these latitudinal patterns in the species diet at the continental scale. Okay. So traditional approaches do not allow for these macroecological patterns in diet, and it takes decades and decades and lots of people to collect this kind of field data. However, like I previously mentioned, that web source photos allow us to do this across large spatial scales. And we modeled the probabilities of different prey groups in the diet across the entire species distribution in the whole of the Americas. And we were able to ask different questions in relation to dietary differences between populations and age groups of caracaras. But unlike the Eurasian sparrowhawk, this species shows limited sexual dimorphism. Therefore, we were unable to look at sex differences in diet. And again, here's the distribution of our web source photos. And you can see on the left, this is in relation to latitude. And then on the right is a map of the Americas with the two Karakara population distributions and the overlap zone in the Amazon. We have quite an even coverage for both populations, but as you get towards the overlap zone, you can see that the number of photographs decreases. Okay, here's some example photographs that we analyzed in our data set. You're looking at different age groups, adults and juveniles, on feeding on different prey groups. Okay, so there's some birds there, some mammals there, some reptiles. And what we found was that for adult caracaras, individuals from the southern population were more likely to feed on birds relative to adults from the northern population. But this pattern was reversed when we're looking at reptilian prey, with adult individuals from the northern population significantly more likely to feed on reptiles than those from the southern population. However, we found no differences in the juvenile diet between populations. And you can see here we were able to then model the probability of different prey groups in relation to latitude. And you can see here for so on the the x-axis you have latitude, so a latitude value of 0 is closer to the equator, and then moving away from the equator, the higher the value. And you can see in the top three plots here for the northern population, fish and invertebrates were more likely to be in the species diet closer to the equator, whereas the opposite pattern was found for mammals, where we had a higher probability of mammals in the diet the further you moved away from the equator. And this pattern was reversed for the southern population, but in reality it's exactly the same thing. More fish closer to the equator, fewer mammals closer to the equator, more mammals as you move away southwards into Argentina and Chile. And this is what we'd expect from biogeographic theory, looking at the spatial distribution of different taxonomic groups. Okay, so the last case study I'm going to talk about is research we're working on at the moment, advancing the field using machine learning. So the aim of our research is to build a convolutional neural network to classify web source photos to rapidly advance data processing. And we're doing this because it takes a very long time to manually sift through photographs from web platforms. So what we did is we used red-tailed hawk observation data from Michaela's honours thesis, and we trained a convolutional neural network. And we asked it to process the images for us and identify which photographs contained birds with prey and which photographs contained birds without any prey, because most photographs in these web platforms are of birds just flying with no prey. Okay, so we found that we had about a 60% accuracy when we used a convolutional neural network or trained a machine to do this, which is far better than what we experienced when we did it manually. So when we manually sift, we calculated about a 3% chance of returning photographs that contained birds with prey. And then when we used this machine approach, we were able to increase this to 60%. So convolutional neural networks, they can rapidly increase data processing speeds, and previous studies have had to manually sift through thousands and thousands of photographs. And I am an example of someone who sat there and sifted through thousands of photographs to try and extract the data we needed for our papers. It takes a long time, weeks and weeks and weeks. And this is work that's currently in progress, and it's mainly being led by a collaborative group at University of Cape Town, okay, with Arjun Amar. Okay, methods, ethics, and limitations. So with all approaches, we need to consider and be sensible about the different limitations. So the key limitations, one of the key limitations is obviously sampling bias. So unstructured secondary source data is very limited by sampling bias, and sometimes you can more often get spatial clustering. So these photographic data can be more likely to be taken in urban areas or areas where humans live or can access relative to more remote areas that are more inaccessible. So you need to consider that in your analysis or control for it somehow. It could be applying some sort of thinning metric to your data set. This approach is limited by the species detectability. So more cryptic species, although this approach can work quite well for it, some cryptic species are just less represented in these large web platforms relative to more common species, and you need to account for that somehow if you're doing a multi-species analysis. You're obviously using secondary data or this web source media data, you run into misidentifications, and this can happen. But this is more of an issue with social media data, where there is rarely any validation or quality control process. So iNaturalist is a really good source of data, and misidentifications tend to get removed quite quickly when different experts are able to identify species in a photograph. Okay, so it's quite a reliable source of accurate identification data there. And obviously, we have ethical issues associated with using third-party data. Photographs may be taken in sensitive locations. There may be a result of nest disturbance, which is not what we want, and obviously, of course, illegal activity. So, if you suspect that, my advice is to report the observation to the web platform host and do not use it in your research. Okay, that's quite rare. I haven't seen too many instances of that. Okay, so I talked earlier about a prey size bias. Now, this is something we detected in our Sparrowhawk data set. So how did we do this? So we created a prey consumption scale, 1 to 5, where a value of 1 was for photographs where the prey item was still alive and fighting against the sparrowhawk, and then prey consumption stage 5 was basically where the prey was skeletal remains and it had been completely consumed. And then what we did was we used YouTube videos of sparrowhawks hunting and feeding on prey, and we recorded the time it took for each prey consumption stage to start and end, and then we compared the proportion of time taken for each stage with the proportion of the photographs taken within each prey consumption stage, and this allowed us to quantify the potential prey size bias in our data set. So you can see here that large prey items were more likely to be included in our data set, and medium and small prey items such as blackbirds and small passerines were underrepresented using our approach. But it's also important to say that other methods used to study raptor diet, such as prey remains analysis and pellet analysis, also have a prey size bias associated with them. So best practice principles. So if you're using web source media in your research, it's important to be transparent about your inclusion criteria in your methods section. You need to explicitly acknowledge your biases in your data set, because you will never have the perfect data set. It doesn't exist. So you need to be honest with your reader. You need to be conservative with your inference, given the fact that you're using secondary unstructured data. Don't try and oversell what your results actually show, unless you can prove it with or support it with some robust statistics. And then we need to be careful about applying ethical filtering and anonymization, and making sure that people's personal information, such as names and locations, are not published alongside any publications. Okay, so towards the future of raptor research. So web source media is here to stay and will play an integral role in future raptor research, and we're seeing more and more papers being published all the time. Recently finished that review article that we've been working on, and ever since then more papers have come out that we were unable to capture in our review. But I'm excited to see web source media be integrated with different approaches to study raptors, whether that's telemetry tracking, more structured citizen science data sets, protected area assessments. And really, here lies opportunities for global South leadership. So web source media is a really accessible way for people to publish high quality research without the need to obtaining huge funding, grants, and support from funders in the field. And really, it just involves a stable internet connection and an understanding of the study species and identification skills. And this obviously gives rise to opportunities for cross-continental collaboration, which is something that I really love to do. However, there is a need for more shared protocols on how to process data, ethical guidelines, and open source data and workflows. And India and the wider subcontinent represents many untapped opportunities given the numerous raptor species that occur there and the fact that we don't know too much about most of them. And so just wanted to finish with this. I want you to think about this. So some of the most data-rich raptor systems of the future will be online before they're ever in formal scientific databases, and web source media are the reason why this occurs. So in summary, web source media are already shaping raptor science. Raptor ecology can be studied across new spatial, temporal, and taxonomic scales, and this overcomes some of the traditional limitations associated with traditional field-based approaches. However, it's really important that web source media should not replace field work at all, but actually should be used as a complement to it. And the question is no longer if they are useful, but how carefully we use them. Okay. And I just wanted to say thanks to Dev for the invitation to talk about some of my research today, and all of these people here. And of course, the thousands of photographers that continue to take photographs of wildlife with which we use to study in our own research. And just the final slide, an invitation for discussion and questions if you have any. And of course, if you would like to reach out for a potential collaboration, or if you want to run an idea past me, I'm always accessible. The best way to contact me is probably by email. And if you're interested in any of the papers that I've mentioned in the case study section of this talk today, I've given you QR codes, so you can just scan your phone and be taken directly to the papers directly. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Connor.
No, you're welcome.
Uh, we have some questions popping up in the chat
Okay,
box. You can just open it and yeah.
I'll stop sharing my screen.
Hmm.
Okay, right, let's go. Okay, let's see.
Have you
Paul
opened the
Pop.
chat box?
Yep, yeah, I'm in the
Yeah,
chat.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you
Okay.
want me to read them out, or would you like to read the questions out?
Actually, my throat is paining. So, is it okay if you
I'll do
can
it.
just yeah,
Yeah, it's absolutely fine. Okay, so Paul says,
yeah.
what are the legal implications for using metadata or derived data from photos which do not have any Creative Commons licensing associated with it, such as social media? Is it technically legal? Well, that's a good question. First of all, I'm not a lawyer, so I couldn't give you a legally concrete response. But yeah, it's really important to make sure you're using any Creative Commons um, photographs or videos with the appropriate license. My understanding is that Creative Commons licenses allow you to use it for research, but you can't use the photographs for any commercial activities. You can't make money off of it. And actually, the journals will be able to advise on that if you have any questions. So far, I've never had any problems with using photographic data in research with journals. And then Paul's also said, and the attribution to these images becomes cumbersome, right? Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So in the main data sets, you can list, you can have an attribution for each observation, and often that comes with, if you do a bulk download of the metadata, say from Macaulay Library or iNaturalist, it should come with the license with it for each observation. Hope I answered your question. Okay, I've got another question here from Mathieu. You mentioned that web source studies use much more photographs than videos. Is there any effect of the fact that photos are much more easily available on the web and of much better quality as compared to videos? Yes, absolutely agree with you there. And also, it's easier to use photographs in dietary studies, for example, because as you're flicking through the photographs and extracting the data, you want to be as quickly as possible, as quick as possible. And if you have to sit there and watch a 3-minute video every time, it quickly becomes quite cumbersome. But from our review article, we found that behavior papers, avian behavior papers tend to use roughly half the time videos because that is related to their research question. So if you're studying diet, you won't tend to necessarily have to go through videos, but photos would be much more accessible for you. Okay, I've got another question. Vikas, what are the ethical considerations of using iNaturalist images in our research paper? I think I probably covered that with Paul's response, but I would always encourage you to check with iNaturalist first and the journals. So the journals, if they accept a paper for publication, it's my understanding that they're responsible for the publication. So um, Plus One, for example, are very I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but Plus One are very keen on protecting themselves legally and will ask for license agreements and permissions on nearly anything in a figure. And so they would be the first point of call to ask, I think. So before you um, spend lots of hours analyzing data, it would be a good idea to contact the journal you have in mind first, just in case they have a policy against using this data. But to date, I haven't come across any barriers to this so far. I don't think Arjun has either. Okay. Another question. Harsh Jadav, how did narrow
Hashtag.
down restrict your data set search to limit media sources for your photos? And can you kindly explain how seasonal variations were interpreted from photos? Okay, so the seasonal variations were interpreted based on the observation dates. So we used the month that the photograph was taken and reclassified them into a broad season category. I think that's hopefully what you mean by that. There were cases. So in the UK, we have distinct seasons. So if there was a photograph that said that it was photographed in, say, July, but the image included the bird feeding and the background was trees without any leaves on, it would indicate winter. So we would just exclude that from our data set. So that's one way that you can remove errors and duplicates. And sorry, the first part of your question was how did you narrow down, restrict your data set search to limit me? Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. If you want to study really common species such as peregrine falcon, or for example, Michaela studied, her project was on red-tailed hawk, there will be thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs. You can filter in iNaturalist and Macaulay Library, I think. I think it's Macaulay Library as well, by feeding events. So that will return you a subset data set, which you can extract the data from. It's best to do a bulk download. But I would recommend not doing that because most of the time people will take photographs of a hawk feeding and they won't um, classify it properly with the feeding ecology tick box or whatever, and therefore you'll miss data. So what we did, so for example, with the Caracaras, I think we screened 40,000 images, but we did it a team of three of us. We downloaded all the 40,000. I started from the top, Vince started from the bottom, and then someone started in the middle, and we just processed manually over a few weeks, extracted the prey data like that. There were probably better ways that we could have done that, but at the time, that's what the options we had available to us. But with the machine learning approaches, it should become quicker if you know how to train a machine. It's probably not very helpful. Hope I answered your question. Another question: are there any free images available in iNaturalist of raptors like vulture species for research? Probably. I imagine. Um, the best, if you want to do this kind of research, you have to pick your study species um, carefully because there may not be sufficient sample sizes to do what you're trying to do. So there's obviously like a preliminary screening phase of any project where you see if it's actually feasible by having a play around on iNaturalists, etc. But iNaturalists, going back to the licensing comment, iNaturalists encourage use for the data in research, and they actually have research grade observations that you can download. So in terms of legalities, I think iNaturalists are quite happy for you to use their photographs, and photographers are aware of that when they upload. Um, how any time for more, or shall I stop there?
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay if you're not ready to. Yeah. So
Okay, I'll do.
thank you
I'll do.
so
Shall I do
much.
one more? I'll do one more.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Connor
All right then.
Panther, for an
Oh, you're welcome.
enriching and thought-provoking session. Your clarity of field experiences and your ability to connect science with real world conservation challenges truly make learning meaningful. I also had some questions, but it's okay.
Okay.
uh,
You can you can feel free to contact me if you need
Yeah,
if you have any
sure, sure,
questions.
sure.
Yeah,
I'll contact
and
you
shoot me
with
an email.
through Devrat. Yeah, he's not
Yeah.
here right now. He might be
Okay.
busy somewhere. Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. And this session will be is recorded and will be uploaded on YouTube as well. So with that,
Hmm.
we come to the close to this session event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and take care, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Connor.